the other auto train. Amtrak's auto train is a special Amtrak train where you can drive your car onto, which leaves from Lorton, Virginia to Sanford, Florida, consisting of 2 engines and lots of train cars. There is usually superliner cars on it, and sometimes there's single-level rail cars and sometimes hybrid. But because the auto train is so special, it goes on a long-distance route to Sanford, Florida, with sharing the route with the Silver Star and Silver Meteor. And this is what makes Amtrak really special indeed. Out in the desert, it's very hot. There is no water, and it can reach temperatures of 100 to 200 degrees Celsius, which is hotter than the summer sunshine in New England. And this is why trains are really useful indeed with passengers, freight, and gender service. Excursion trains are useful too, because they're used for fun and for special events and all that good stuff. And steam locomotives can run anytime they feel like it. Locomotives are really useful when they pass each other on the main line with freight behind them of where he or she needs to go. But because adult trains are big and really useful, kid trains can shunt train cars in the yard while the adult trains are busy. And under the bogies of the train cars, there's a hot box detector which tells how hot or cold the bearings are, because if they get really hot, it could derail the train. And sometimes the wheel axle seizes, which the wheels can't move. And this is why trains are really useful indeed to whatever things they deliver around the island of New Florida, the island of Trescott, and Sodor, of course. And this is why trains on the tracks are really useful indeed for the hard work they do every day. Intercity trains go on long distances. They can be state-supported or long distance, in which trains can have 2 or more engines, or sometimes there's one engine leading and the rest are trailing. But because these trains are so special, they are always really useful for the hard work they do every day. A woman train is a special railroad vehicle too. It is authorized to special gender workers, which are operators, captains, or more, and they can hook up more than one engine together, of which they face the same way or backwards. And this is why trains on the tracks are really useful to whatever things they deliver for the hard work they do on Mr. Cakester's railroad. Narrow gauge trains run on small tracks, and sometimes they run on transition rails, which makes them useful too. One day, Mr. Cakester had a special job for Kate, Laurie, and Leanne. It was a special announcement. Today, hey you three, Mr. Cakester said, I would like you to pull a big mega train. He said. Megatrains are huge, Kate said. I bet so, said Mr. Cakester. You should use your ditch lights when you leave. And they steamed out of the yard. I know a lot about women trains, Kate said, because we're big engines, of course. Before long, the three engines buffered up to the other trailing units. We're ready to go, said Kate. Women train is ready. They hooked up to the freight cars in front. And they steamed onto the main line. Here we go, Kate said. Really useful women engines coming through. They were feeling pleased with themselves as they led the whole train with 259 cars, and that was a lot. The baggage car was loaded with lots of baggage, toys, and everything. And there was a transition car between two brake vans and a scale car in the rear. Kate was feeling pleased with herself as she pulled the train along. Women engines like me can be useful like this, Kate said. This is how you pull women trains. They were feeling happy with themselves. Then they passed the shunting yard with the MBTA commuter rail from Boston, Massachusetts in it. It was big. We can be really useful, Kate said, because we're really useful women trains. I bet we are, said Leanne, because I once crashed into a man train before. I was there too, Laurie said. I remember that too. And over while the sunset was setting, some passengers were having dinner in the dining car. This is yummy, they hummed. I love this pasta. Just then, the existing Amtrak auto train began to roar by. And the horn sounded, and it roared by with the passengers on board and the cars in the rear. It was on its way to Lorton, Virginia. It was long. That night, the sun began to set, and it was night, and the guard was asleep in the brake van while the sleeper car passengers were asleep in their rooms, and the train went along. It was cozy in the brake vans. When morning broke, the train began to move through the snow. A man train was waiting at a signal to let Kate pass. It was carrying lots of hazardous materials, and in the brake van, the guard and the crew members were having lunch, and the man train was led by locomotive 3829 ATSF. But then there was trouble. Kate, Leanne, and Laurie were fast approaching, and they were going fast, and the guard jumped out of the brake van to avoid being hit by debris and falling rail equipment. My ditch lamps are flashing, said Kate. We should hit the brakes. Her driver slammed on the emergency brakes. But it was too late! Oh no! They cried as they launched themselves into the air with the brake van, and fire raged and raged, and the train started to derail with the rampaging fire. And then the freight cars began to flip over on their sides, and the fire rampaged and rampaged, and the tank cars had derailed, and then the train began to flip over, and they flipped, and fire raged after the brake van exploded. And thankfully, the guard had made it out unhurt before the wreck. And finally, everything came to a halt. When Dwee saw the accident, she could not believe it. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Kate had rear-ended the toxic waste train, and the train cars had derailed and made an S in the middle of the rails, and some cars remained upright, and Kate had turned onto her side with Laurie and Leanne. I hope these trains are repaired soon, said Dwee. Meanwhile, Ida was shunting the freight cars out of the way. They had to be taken by Jill, Amy, and Susan. They're all ready to go, said Ida. And before she knew it, Jill, Amy, and Susan were fast approaching. We're excited to collect all the waste, they said. Then Jill had an idea. Why don't we hook our train up to the freight cars that stayed on the tracks? Jill said. 'Cause Dwee was hoping that they would be repaired. And they backed their train cars up to the others. And they steamed down the line. I'm glad the fire is out, Jill said, because we're really useful engines. It takes a lot for us to help with colorful smoke, said Amy. I bet so, said Susan, and they steamed into the sunset. That night, Kate and Leanne admitted their accident. I'm sorry we had a wreck, said Kate. It was bad. And I'm glad that man locomotive stayed on the tracks, said Leanne. And both of them went to sleep in their sheds, happily sleeping that they would only hope that there was no other accident in the future.